For month 10, we are going to be making snowball blocks. So you have 10 squares that are white or cream, and then you have 10 squares that are colored. From all 10 of the cream or white squares, we need to cut one 3.5 inch square. So, as usual, I'm just going to straighten 2 edges, and I am cutting a stack of 4. So, like I always said, if you're going to make a mistake, if you're doing that, you're going to make it times 4. So because it was stacked, I'm going to rotate my mat. And I'm going to line up the 3.5 inch mark with the 2 sides that I just cleaned up the edges. So all 10 of the cream and whites. From each of the 10 colored squares, I need 4 1.25 inch squares. So to do that, I'm going to start by cutting a 2.5 inch square out of the stack. And again, I have mine stacked. And it really works a lot better when you're cutting when you're standing right in front of it. Okay, and again, I'm going to rotate the mat because I have a stack. And 1.25 times 2 is 2.5. So I'm going to line up my 2.5 inch mark on the 2 sides that I just cut. And cut. And now I'm going to cut this in half twice. So I'm going to line up my 1.25 inch mark on the long edge and any line on the short edge to keep this straight. Cut, and that one moved, so I'm going to move it out of the way, and I'll be cutting this in 2 steps instead of 1 all the way across. If it hadn't moved, I could have just done a cut all the way across. So 1.25, any line on the long edge now, and cut. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one. 1.25 on the short edge, any lines on the long edge to keep it straight, and cut. So we need that out of all 10 of our multicolored squares for 1.25 inch squares. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do your corners onto your big squares. The first is the way the pattern says. So on the wrong side of my 1.25 inch squares, I just want to mark 1 diagonal line going point to point. And I am using a sandpaper board here. I don't think they make ones like what I have anymore. But remember, you can just use a piece of sandpaper, or you could just put it in a folder. You could glue it to a board. It doesn't have to be like this one. So if we're marking them, you would mark all of them on the wrong side, just 1 diagonal line. And then you would just take those squares and put them in the corner of your white. And when I go to sew, I do not want to sew directly on that line. I want to sew about a needle's width out toward the corner, because that gives me space then when I'm finished sewing for this to turn back on itself and reach all the way to the corner. So that's one way. Now on adding the corners, you can either match the same color on all 4 corners, or you can just mix them up. I'm going to be mixing mine up. So with drawing the line, we're going to sew right next to the line, and then we have to come back and trim. So this is a way to do it, to skip the marking step. This is a folded corner clipper ruler, and rather than marking, we would just take it. My square is 1.25, so I'm going to line up my 1.25 here and here. I want it lined up so that I'm taking the smallest part off here, so there's more left here. So I'm just going to line that up, and I do already have it on my big square, right sides together, just exactly like I'm going to sew it. And then I would just cut that corner off. Now that's what I would be cutting off after I stitched on the part that's drawn. So now with this method, I just come and sew my 1/4 inch seam, and I don't have to come back and clip it later. So after I sew my 1/4 inch seam, then I just press my corner out. So either way will work. completely up to you. I just wanted to show you something different since we have done corners before. If you use the drawn line method like this one is, you will need to go back and trim the seam allowance. Now I personally like to press my corners first to make sure that I have it going all the way to the edge. You can trim it first, completely up to you. But in this case, because this one is pressed in, make sure you're cutting the right one. So we don't want to cut the piece that's on the front. Just fold that back out of the way. And we're going to just trim off the extra to about 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now what I wanted to point out is the pattern tells you to press half of these so your seam from the corners is going in toward the center, and half so your seam is going away from the center. So what I did, I just opted for the ones that were kind of creamy color. There are 5 of them, and I pressed all those in, and all the ones that are more white I pressed out. This is not in the directions and it is not required, but if you would like to, you can sew these guys together in a row. So I alternated the whiter ones with the creamier ones, completely up to you. You can combine them however you want. So when you go to sew them together, I would alternate so that we have one going out and one going in on the seams to match up. Now, if you got little jogs, and I don't know that I have any that are super obvious, where either your corner is sticking out beyond the white or it's in a little bit, then match up the edges of the white, because we know that was a 3.5 inch square. So if we do our seams from the edge of the white, then it'll be more accurate. So if you choose to sew them together, and you don't have to do that this month, but you will be doing it eventually, once they're all sewn together, the row should be 30.5 inches long. I did sew my snowball blocks together, and I did not look far enough ahead in the pattern to see how it said to press it. I pressed my seams open just to avoid having a lot of bulk in any point. So for homework next month, either bring 10 individual snowball blocks or one strip of 10 snowball blocks sewn together.